Howdy, and welcome back to the Big Jake podcast. This is episode 9. It's middle of May, May 21st, 2023. Glad you're with us here, and I got some fun news that happened. So we'll just get right into it. No use just beating around the bush. I know I'm wearing a snowman shirt, which is a weird thing to wear in the middle of May, but sometimes you want to feel like a snowman. I don't know. This last week, did some fun comedy stuff. On Monday, I was at Zany's at New Material Monday. It was very exciting because I ran into fun comedians, had a good show. It was weird because I was going to make the drive no matter what, but was still a little concerned whether or not they would let me do the show, because it's that big of a show. So I was excited though. I showed up and they had the list and my name was on it, which was great. And then I noticed a couple of things on the list. The closer was John Crist, and at the bottom it said leave 20 minutes in case Nate Bargatze. Okay. So that's how we're going to do it here. Nashville, I guess. We'll have John Crist closing. We'll have Nate Bargatze maybe do 20 minutes. That's exciting. So I did the show. I was late on the lineup, and at that point just stayed for the whole show. So I was on before Nate and John, so I got to see their whole sets. Very fun. They're obviously working out material. They brought their notebooks up and tried to talk things out, and it went pretty good. I mean, they're funny guys. So I enjoyed that. But it was pretty surreal at times. A couple of fun things happened to me when I was at Zany's. I got off the show and show ends, and I go to the bathroom, and in the bathroom is AJ Wilkerson, who's also a very good comedian, a friend of mine. And the bathroom's real small, and I'm in there, and the guy's like, "Oh, what?" Yeah. And so he's just apologizing because there's two guys in this small bathroom. And then I'm like, "Oh, AJ," like, "Oh, Jake." And so we hug in the bathroom, which is a weird place to hug inside of a bathroom. But then I said, I'll talk to him outside the show. And I talked to him outside the show, and it was good. It was also interesting. After the show, a young man came up to me, and he's like, "You taught me ACT prep in Colorado." And I said, I'm sure I did. And I did not remember his name. That's not uncommon. I taught 200 students a year. And I mean, I started teaching 10 years ago. So it's been a lot of students, and it's been a long time. But very nice guy. He said he moved to Nashville. He's working he's got some cool job. He goes to the comedy club a lot. We got a picture together. It was really interesting and fun to see that, because I've ran into students before, but the other time I've ran into students, I was in Vail. I was in Vail, Colorado, which is not that weird to run into students that you taught in Colorado. Of course, Vail and Denver are a couple hours away, but still, that made sense. This is a little bit different. Here I'm in Nashville, and I ran into a kid that I taught 10 years ago in Denver. So that was interesting. And I was very cool of him to come say hi. I always would love that. And then on Tuesday, this was a weird one. So I got in real late on Monday night. Didn't sleep great. Got up, had to still go to my day job. Was kind of dragging all day. And then late in the afternoon, the booker for the Louisville Comedy Club hits me up, says, hey, can you feature tonight for Jeff Arcuri? And I said, sure. So I featured for him. Very fun guy. It was a sold-out show. On a Tuesday, selling out is a big deal. Tuesday sold-out show. Very funny. He's this New York comedian, does a lot of crowd work. Does a lot of material, too. So his material's very good. And very nice guy. Got a picture of him with him. And the stage manager got some really cool photos of me on stage with a big crowd, and it just looked cool. And so I did a little post about it. And I also reached out to Jeff and said, hey, Jeff, great working with you. Nice to meet you. And he said, yeah, everybody was really nice. They really liked you, apparently. They're even talking to me about you on the subreddit. I said, the subreddit? First of all, I don't know that you had your own subreddit. I'm like, okay. It's a weird flex, but hey, I'll go check it out. So I checked it out, and sure enough, there's some people there that said, hey, the guy who opened for Jeff in Louisville, also funny, and his name's Jake, which is nice when they remember your name, because they don't have to do that. I only did 20 minutes. Jeff comes up there. He does like an hour, and it's a long time in between the end of the show and when I was on. So, but it was very nice of them. It was a good show. Of course, then I got home late that night and was still dragging basically all week. I'll get into a little bit of that later. Then on Saturday, so yesterday, I was in Indiana, but it was a far place. It was a little bit past Fort Wayne, and I was at this place called the Tippy Creek Winery with Jason Resler. It was an interesting show. It was a good show. The crowd was full. It looked sold out, but it was also outside, which was weird. I mean, outside in the middle of May, as the sun's setting, you start and it's like, the temperature's okay, but then it starts getting cold. I mean, it's getting cold. If you don't have a coat on, you're going to be suffering. I did my 30 minutes, then I went and I sat and watched the rest of the show, and I was cold. I had a coat on, and I was still cold. So the other people, I'm sure, were as well. So anyway, that was a weird... I don't know why people like doing outside shows. Like, hey, what good comedy club is outside? Oh, is it none of them? None? Then maybe we don't do these outside. And they had this big inside event space. And yeah, they would have to cram everybody in there, but that's the good part. That's what we want. As comedians, we want everybody to be crammed in there. It would have been a dynamite show if everybody was crammed into the room as opposed to outside. So it does feel weird. You get the sun setting. When I started yesterday, for the first 5 minutes, there was a generator at this pulled pork food truck. This generator just blaring. Like, this is going to be a rough show. Now, they said, whenever I started, they said, oh, it's only going to be there for the next 5 minutes. So it was, and that's nice, but still was not into the generator. Oh, man. Upcoming this next week, I got a light week. Have one show out of town, going to Summit City, which is in Fort Wayne. They've got a fun comedy club up there. And gonna do 30 minutes. I think I'm closing out their Thursday show So we'll see how that goes. Should be a good time. And yeah, we'll just see how that works out. And of course, I mean, things have been added left and right, so we'll see if anything gets added in the next few days. In other comedic related news, your boy has been doing some improv, which is weird, right? I started in improv. I really enjoyed improv. There was a time when I did improv all the time. I would do it. I would be performing or practicing 6, sometimes even 7 days a week. Sometimes I would have multiple practices and performances on the same day. I would take classes. I was into it. I was a big fan. It's funny because I started improv because of a podcast. I was listening to this podcast. One guy was giving another guy grief about saying he was going to take improv classes and didn't take improv classes. And the guy that didn't, he said he was going to, but didn't, said, "Oh, but I got this improv mentor and we're working together like 1 hour a week." And the other guy's like, "That's not the same. You need to take an improv class." And at that point, I wasn't sure what he was talking about. I didn't know that you could take an improv class. I had no idea. So I just Googled improv class Denver, and 2 things came up. At the time, there was one called the Voodoo Comedy Playhouse. They've changed their name to Rise. And then there was the Bovine. And the Voodoo one was cheaper. So I signed up and I took classes with the Voodoo. I took level 1 on, I think it was a Tuesday. It was my very first class. And by the end of the class, I was thinking, I am so into this. And I signed up for level 1 at the Bovine to run at the same time. So I'm going to go to both these classes. And at the time, you could do these drop-in spots, and there are these jams, and there was more stage time available. And then as I kind of climbed up the ranks and completed classes and started performing, I found out that in Denver at the time, man, they were throwing stage time at you. They just loved improv and couldn't get enough. And it seemed that the supply of improv performers was not big enough for the demand of improv. So you could get stage time all over the place. I kept a spreadsheet, and 1 year I performed 83 times for improv. All 83 of those were for adults, and the adults paid to watch me. Now, of those 83, I got paid maybe twice, but they were ticketed events. In the stand-up world, that's a little different. Oftentimes we get paid even if the audience doesn't. And sometimes the audience buys tickets and the comedian gets paid. It's an interesting change, though, going from improv to stand-up. But 83 is a lot. That is a ton of performances over the course of a year. So I was super into it. And then I still was into it. I wanted to do it more. But a couple of things didn't really work out. I didn't have the time for a couple of, like, the schedules was some conflicts, and one thing led to another, and I started stand-up, and I was like, this is something I want to pursue. And so I did improv here and there and kind of weaned myself off, and then got into stand up full force. And at that point, you're performing way more than 83 times, but a lot of those are open mics. And a lot of those you're working at your material, and so it's different. But all that to say is I got back into improv. So when I moved to Louisville, I looked for opportunities to network with improvisers. And one of the first things I did was I went to a place called the Bardstown, and I went to a show where they did this improv jam. And it was a couple of different improv troupes. One of them was Improv Anonymous. I think Kentucky Bill was one of them. I forget all of them. But it was all of these different improv troupes were performing. So I bought a ticket. I watched. I was into it. And met and talked to a bunch of the people afterwards. Basically said, hey, I'm good at this. And they said, that's great, but we're just getting out of the pandemic and we're not looking to add any performers to our group. So that was like 2 years ago. And in those 2 years, I've done a little bit of improv, but very little, probably like 3 days in the last 2 years. So it was a big deal for me to kind of get back into it. So last Wednesday, I went to an improv. It was actually an audition, but it was one of these 2-hour auditions that it was basically go to their practice and hang out at their practice and do stuff with them. And so I did that on Wednesday, and then they did a callback, and the callback is in a couple of days. We'll see what comes of that. You're asking yourself, hey, Jake, I thought you were stand-up. Why are you doing improv? Why would you even waste your time with that? And there's a couple of things. First of all, I like it. It's fun. It's weird, super weird, can be extremely cringe-inducing. If done poorly, improv is one of the worst things ever. I have seen it done poorly and just make your skin crawl. Oh my goodness, what's happening? But if done well, it is super fun. But one of the things I like about improv is it helps me generate material and think less possessively of the material. Because in an improv scene, you'll do something. It'll be super funny. Everybody will laugh. Huge laugh. And then that's the first time you said that and the last time. Well, improv is so much different than stand-up in that regard. Because stand-up, I know when they're going to laugh. I've said this joke 500 times. It's gotten a laugh all 500 times. It's going to work. So it's different. It makes you generate the material because you can't really plan ahead. You have to react. And then the material is like a smoke in the wind. It's there and then it's gone. And I like that. I like both making me create material and the material that is created being less attached to it. So those are some of the reasons why I think improv would be fun. I've got a story for you today, and it is close to this improv idea. So when I was a sophomore in high school, the school put on a play. Now, the school always put on a play. The English teacher was always tasked with helping the seniors put a play on. And so it was called the senior play. But they didn't have enough people willing to get into play garb in order to put the play on. And so I was recruited to be part of the senior play when I was a sophomore. And the play was Robin Hood. Now, I'm a huge Robin Hood fan. There's so much about Robin Hood that I like. The old Disney cartoon with the fox and the bear and all of that, I'm into. When I was younger, when I was in 7th or 8th grade, I remember going to a sporting good store and noticing that they had bow and arrows, and you could buy bow and arrows, and they weren't very expensive. They were $20 for a bow, an arrow, and like a target, like a styrofoam target. So I saved up and convinced my parents to buy a bow and arrow and a styrofoam target. Now, that probably doesn't sound that weird, but you have to remember where I was living. I was living downtown Denver in an upstairs duplex. So the building that we lived in was one regular-ish size house that was cut in half horizontally. And there was the upstairs where we lived, and there was the downstairs where other people lived. Where am I going to shoot a bow and arrow? What are we doing here? Why do I even own this thing? But I had a bow and arrow. I would take it into this little tiny backyard. I mean, this just little tiny patch of dirt. And I think I shot it a couple times. But I really didn't get proficient at shooting a bow and arrow, but I was into it. So when this play comes around, they need more people. And they saw me, and at the time I was, well, still am, 6'8". So when I was 6'8", when I started my very first day in my freshman year of high school, I was 6'8". So here, of course, since my sophomore year, still 6'8". And they said, we need this guy to be Little John. And Little John was the best. I mean, Robin Hood, he's fine, but Little John, yeah, he's a pretty cool character. Oh, yeah, I liked the Disney version, but also was a huge Mel Brooks fan. And Mel Brooks had, Spaceballs and Blazing Saddles, but the peak, in my mind, of Mel Brooks' creative outlet is Robin Hood Men in Tights. I loved that movie so much. So the idea that I could be Little John, be in the play, I am so into it. Anyway, they cast me. I had to learn an English accent, which did not go well, but I gave it a shot. I had a few lines, not very many, for who I would consider a fairly main character. I mean, how many characters are in Robin Hood? You've got Robin Hood, Maid Marian, Little John, Sheriff of Nottingham, Friar Tuck, 5 characters. And you could probably get rid of Friar Tuck. But anyway, I didn't have a whole lot of lines. Was still in the play. I remember one scene of the play, me and another guy grabbed the sheriff and held him upside down by his ankles so that like his money bag would fall. It was pretty weird, but it was pretty fun too. Anyway, so I'm Robin Hood in this play. The the whole thing went great. It was fun. It was interesting. I really did enjoy it. The weird part was I enjoyed it so much and never really gave any thought to why I enjoyed it or to pursue it at all. So the next year the play rolled around. I wasn't a senior, but they needed people and I instantly volunteered. My school was just so small that there was no such thing as a theater nerd. There was no like, here are the drama kids. It wasn't possible. There's only 9 of us in our grade. So they had to be in multiple circles. So it's one of those things where looking back, obviously I would like to be on stage. But I never really pursued it, except to be Little John in a school production of Robin Hood. So there's your story. As far as books are going, I did read a few. I've been reading a few books. I really want to up my book game. I have a goal of reading 30 minutes a day. And I think I'm going to up that goal of reading an hour a day. So I'm into it. But a couple of the books that I've been reading, I'm currently reading Harlan Coben's When. So Harlan Coben, he writes this series with Myron Bolitar, and I've read several books in that series. And Myron's sidekick is a guy named Win, and this is a book just about Win, which he's a very interesting character. So so far I'm into it. I also am nearing completion of another David Sedaris book. Big fan of David Sedaris. I've read 5 or 6 of his books now. The book that I'm currently reading is called Naked, which is a little weird because naked, I went when I was in Texas. I was still in the middle of reading this book, but I didn't want to bring any books. I checked out from the library. And I didn't want to bring any books all the way to Texas, any library books to Texas. So instead I went to the library and was killing some time, and I was like, hey, maybe they've got a copy of this book. I could figure out where I am in the book and read a chapter or two, put it back on the shelf, and be done. But I felt really weird typing in naked in the book search engine. I found the book in new condition, and I bought it because I've really been enjoying this book. This book is a little bit more autobiographical than some of David Sedaris' other books. Some of his other books are kind of hodgepodgey and throwing together ideas. This one is a little bit more linear. I kind of like it so far. It's a pretty good book. And I bought it, and then Mother's Day rolled around, and I said, oh, I think my mom would like this book. And so I sent it to her, which again, I felt kind of weird mailing a book named Naked to my mom. And it's been a week now, and I'm sure she's got it, but she has not talked to me about it. So she probably hasn't opened it yet. Saw that I sent her a book, but hasn't read it. So I'll give her a little while, but then I'll have to follow up with her, see how she likes it. Another book that I just started today is called Grain Brain, and it's interesting. For whatever reason, I've been really into reading books about the brain and how to accurately, how to take care of your brain well. I'm about halfway done with another book called 12 Rules for Brain, 12 Brain Rules, I think. And it's very interesting. I'm into it. But this one is about grain brain. And so far, the argument seems to be that carbohydrates and grains are bad for your brain. That's about it. And he's making this argument, and I'm hearing him out. But it's interesting. It is one of those things where if I can get a better, healthier, more sharp brain by cutting out grains, well, maybe we'll look into that. So just thinking through those sort of things. As far as the diet has been going, it's okay, hit or miss. Last Tuesday, I fasted all day. So I got in late the day before because I was in Nashville. Woke up, said, I think today would be an easy fast day. Get off work, go home, go to bed early, be done. Well, of course, that's not what happened because I had a show that night where I was featuring for Jeff Arcuri. And so I went to that, and Jeff had this really long line. After the show, everybody wanted to take a picture of him. He's a very nice guy. And I waited around the whole time. So I got out of there pretty late. But still fasted that whole day. So fasting is easy if you're asleep. But if you're not, it can be unpleasant. So I kind of went back and forth, did some keto days, some non-keto days. Not great, not awful, but there you are. This week, I'm looking forward to getting to some open mics. I've got this routine about going to seminary that I want to try out and haven't been able to try out. So I want to give that a shot. There's one joke that I wrote recently that I want to try as well. So I was at the junior senior banquet for the school I used to teach at last week, and I was given one of the girls who I knew and had taught for a couple of years, giving her a hard time for driving. I said, "Oh, you can drive now? How can you reach the pedals?" Something like that. And she says, "Well, look at you. Look how big you are. How can you even fit inside the car?" Which is a good one. And I said, "Oh, it's easy. I just, with a tub of Vaseline and a running start." So I thought that was a good joke, and I want to work that in somewhere. Anyway, well, that's been the podcast, episode 9. We'll catch you on the next one. Take care.